Welcome back. In this video, we'll dive deep into all the armored units in Conflict of Nations. You'll learn the strengths and weaknesses of each armored unit, the best ways to use them in different terrains, and which doctrines maximize each armored unit effectiveness. We'll also cover how to counter armored units, what the best armored task is, and when to deploy them for maximum impact. Plus, I'll also show you powerful strategies for these units. By the end of this guide, you'll know everything about every armored vehicle and how to masterfully use them. Perfect. With that said, let's start with the first armored unit, which are combat recon vehicles. Combat reconnaissance vehicles are small, highly mobile, mainly anti-infantry vehicles designed to be airliftable. They combine effective armor and high mobility to detect, outmaneuver, and engage enemy targets. Additionally, combat recon vehicles are capable of revealing stealth units. This unit is quite effective due to it being available early and being quite cheap, and also not requiring electronics. Additionally, this unit is very light and fast-moving, and it also has a great scouting ability, where with this unit you can detect enemy units and their exact composition and health points. To add on to that, this unit is also able to detect stealth units such as elite special forces, and this unit also has the ability to air assault once researched to level 3. However, unfortunately, this unit comes with a lot of disadvantages. First, it doesn't have any strong anti-air protection, which leaves it vulnerable to all aerial units. Secondly, its damage to infantry and tanks is not that good compared to other armored units. Additionally, this unit is not able to conquer territory and has no special terrain buffs, which I will get more into detail later on. However, despite all this, combat recon vehicles can be very useful, especially for early game. As for what combat recon vehicles counter, they counter all kind of ground units, such as infantry, mobile SAM launchers, anti-air, theater missile defense systems, and all types of light vehicles. On the other hand, what counters combat recon vehicles are all types of helicopters, planes, anti-tanks, heavy armored units such as main battle tanks, and potentially artillery if the opponent uses it correctly. As for the terrains influencing combat recon vehicles, there is no terrain that increases or decreases the attack or the defense of your combat recon vehicles. However, territories such as mountains and forests will improve the scouting range of your combat recon vehicles a little bit, where you will be able to see the exact composition of enemy units. However, it is not that much of a difference, hence there is really no need to worry about this with combat recon vehicles. Regarding doctrines, this unit has no preferred doctrine that gives it advantage, hence it makes no difference under what doctrine you build this unit. If you're unsure about your country's doctrine, join the Discord server linked in the description, where you will find a dedicated channel listing the doctrines of all countries. Personally, I do not recommend building these vehicles in most cases, as there are better vehicles out there you can build. Additionally, it is important to note that when you build combat recon vehicles, you can expect to take quite a lot of causalities, hence lowering your kill per death ratio, also known as KD ratio. This especially happens when you use this unit against infantry or tanks. However, there are some cases in which building this unit may be a good idea. For example, if you have a very tough early game fight between days 1 to 4, then it may be a good idea to build combat recon vehicles to overpower the enemy, since you won't be able to build other better units as fast like Air Force. Hence this will turn to the best option to give you an advantage over your enemy. This would be the only scenario where I would use this unit. If in this scenario you do build this unit, then after day 4, I suggest you stop building this unit and start building other type of units such as Air Force. As it is important to note that this unit is mostly only suitable for early game and not late game. Awesome. With that said, let's now talk about armored fighting vehicles. Armored fighting vehicles are vehicles designed to lead an armored offensive attack. They are like combat recon vehicles, but with more armor and more output damage. However, compared to combat recon vehicles, they are a lot more expensive. They can't air assault and also move a lot slower due to them being heavy armored. However, armored fighting vehicles can be very good in several instances, especially for killing soft units such as infantry, and it also has a very solid damage against tanks. Additionally, it has a good amount of health points, which makes this unit very good on holding the front line against infantry and light vehicles. However, despite that, this unit has a lot of disadvantages. Firstly, this unit can't reveal stealth units, it can't air assault, and it can't move via airlift until it's level 4. Additionally, this unit requires a high amount of components and also requires electronics. Furthermore, unlike combat recon vehicles, this unit doesn't have any strong anti-air protection. It also can't conquer territory, and this unit moves a lot slower compared to lighter armored units too. As for what armored fighting vehicles counter, they counter all kind of ground units, such as infantry, mobile SAM launchers, anti-air, theater missile defense systems, and all types of light vehicles. Additionally, they also counter light armored tanks such as combat recon vehicles. On the other hand, what counters combat recon vehicles are all types of helicopters, planes, heavy armored units such as main battle tanks, anti-tanks, and also potentially artillery if the opponent used correctly as explained before. In regard to terrains influencing armored fighting vehicles, there are several types of terrains that will give buffs to your armored fighting vehicles, but also debuffs. The terrains that will boost your armored fighting vehicles are forests, jungles, and tundras, where you will get an added 25% attack and defense boost with these units in forests and tundras. Additionally, if you use this unit in jungles, then instead of getting a 25% attack bonus, you will get a 50% bonus, which is an enormous advantage. In regard to what nerfs your armored fighting vehicles are mountain terrains, where these units will lose 25% attack and defense in these territories. Hence, make sure to always use armored fighting vehicles in jungles, forests, and tundras, but never in mountains. That way you get the max efficiency of this unit. As for maximizing your armored fighting vehicles further, then you should utilize this unit in a Western Doctrine country, as they will gain an extra 3 health points under Western Doctrine nations. In regard to building this unit, I recommend building it, especially if you're playing a Western Doctrine unit, as this unit is one of the better armored units. Since it has decent damage against infantry and armor, it also has strong terrain buffs and is quite cheap for what it does. This unit is definitely worth building if you're looking to building the cheapest tank but most efficient for its price. Additionally, make sure to always pair this unit with anti-air units such as mobile SAM launchers or anti-air, because if not, then enemy air force will destroy you. Awesome. With that said, let's now talk about amphibious combat vehicles. Amphibious combat vehicles are versatile armored units designed for both land and sea operations. Unlike other armored units, they can go through water, making them highly useful for island nations or coastal invasions. They are similar to armored fighting vehicles, but come with the added ability to move through water, allowing them to participate in amphibious and coastal assaults. This unit is effective in several situations, particularly for launching surprise attacks from the sea and securing coastal territories. It also has solid damage against soft units such as infantry, and it can also hold the front line effectively in certain scenarios. Additionally, its amphibious capability allows it to bypass traditional land-based defenses, making it a strong choice for coastal operations. However, amphibious combat vehicles have several disadvantages. They lack the ability to air assault, which means they rely on naval transport to be repositioned quickly. Additionally, while they are armored, they are not as durable as heavier tank units, making them vulnerable to heavier tank units and also anti-armor units. Furthermore, like other light armored units, they do not have strong anti-air protection, meaning they require air defense support to avoid being taken out by enemy aircraft. They also consume a considerable amount of components and electronics, making them a costly investment compared to standard armored units. In terms of counters, amphibious combat vehicles are most effective against soft targets like infantry and light vehicles. Additionally, they also counter mobile SAM launchers, anti-air units, theater missile defense systems, combat recon vehicles, and all types of light vehicles. However, they are countered by anti-tank units, heavy armored units, aircraft, and potentially artillery if the enemy sets up effective defensive positions. As for the terrains, amphibious combat vehicles have a 25% less damage and defense in mountain terrains, and on the contrary, it has added 25% damage and defense in forests, jungles, and tundra terrains. Hence, make sure to not use your amphibious combat vehicles in mountain terrains, and instead use them in forests, jungles, and tundras for free increased damage in attack and defense modes. In regard to the doctrines, there is no doctrine that influences your amphibious combat vehicles. As for building this unit, it is situational. If you are playing on a map with significant coastal areas, or if you plan on executing amphibious invasions, then amphibious combat vehicles can be a very strong unit. However, if you are playing in a more landlocked area, other armored units like AFVs or main battle tanks may be a better investment. If you choose to use this unit, then again make sure to pair it with anti-air support and proper naval transport to maximize its efficiency. Awesome, let's now talk about MBTs, also known as main battle tanks. Main battle tanks are the heaviest and most durable armored units in the game. They are designed to dominate the ground battlefield with their high armor, strong firepower, and the ability to absorb massive amounts of damage. These tanks are the backbone of any armored assault, making them essential for breaking through enemy lines and also holding key strategic positions. Despite these benefits, main battle tanks come with several drawbacks. Firstly, they are extremely expensive, requiring a lot of components, manpower, and electronics to produce. They are also very slow, meaning they take a long time to reach the battlefield and reaching enemy units, making them less effective for fast-moving strategies and leaving them vulnerable to hit-and-run tactics. Additionally, main battle tanks are vulnerable to air units and anti-tank weapons. Since they lack built-in anti-air defense, this means that attack helicopters, bombers, and ground-based anti-tank units can easily counter them. If an enemy has a strong air force or artillery, main battle tanks can be taken out before they even engage in combat. Additionally, main battle tanks also struggle in certain terrain types, particularly mountains, jungles, and urban areas, where their movement and combat effectiveness are significantly reduced. Main battle tanks counter all armored and ground units except anti-tanks. However, as for what kills main battle tanks, then main battle tanks are heavily countered by attack helicopters, bombers, strike fighters, tanks destroyers, and potentially artillery units if used correctly. Main battle tanks receive terrain buffs in plains and deserts where they gain a 25% attack and a 25% defense boost. However, they suffer nerfs in cities, suburbs, jungles, and mountains where they receive a 25% reduction in attack and defense. Hence, to maximize their effectiveness, try to always use your main battle tanks in plain terrains and avoid terrains like cities, jungles, and suburbs where their performance is significantly hindered. As for the doctrines, main battle tanks benefit in all doctrines. Where in the Western doctrine they get an extra 10% health point stat, and in the Western doctrine then, in the European doctrine they gain a 10% extra infantry damage, and in the Eastern doctrine they get an extra 5% damage against armored units, and an extra 10% speed. So the doctrine you choose depends on the strategy you want to employ. As for building main battle tanks, then I highly suggest building them, as they are one of the strongest armored units in the game. However, they require a lot of resources and support units to be effective. Hence, if you want a high durability frontline tank, main battle tanks are a great choice, but only if you can afford them. Additionally, if you're going to build them, then make sure you build them late game, that way your resources aren't drained. To maximize their effectiveness, you should always pair main battle tanks with anti-air units like mobile SAM launchers or anti-air vehicles to protect them from enemy aircraft. Additionally, you can also pair them with multiple rocket launchers to help them combat artillery. Awesome, let's now talk about tank destroyers. Anti-tank units are specialized ground units designed to counter all tanks. Their primary role is to stop enemy tanks and heavily armored units in their tracks, which they successfully do so by dealing high damage against them. These units excel in defensive positions where they can hold the line against armored assaults. This unit is extremely effective against all types of armored vehicles, including main battle tanks, armored fighting vehicles, combat recon vehicles, and amphibious combat vehicles. However, anti-tank units come with several disadvantages. They are weak against all type of infantry units. Also, attack helicopters and strike fighters can easily eliminate them, since anti-tank units have no anti-air capabilities. Artillery is another major threat, since it can outrange and bombard anti-tank units before they have a chance to retaliate. Hence, due to tank destroyers' limited mobility and lack of versatility, tank destroyers are best used in defensive roles, defending against armored units rather than as aggressive frontline units. Regarding terrain buffs, tank destroyers benefit from fighting in cities and suburbs where they receive a 25% attack and defense boost. However, mountain terrains, jungles, and tundra terrains significantly reduce their effectiveness, causing them to suffer a 25% attack and defense penalty. Hence, make sure to always use your tank destroyers in cities and suburbs and avoid using them in mountains, jungles, and tundra terrains. In regard to the doctrines, you should use anti-tanks under the European doctrine, as they get a 5% boost damage against armored units and 3 extra health points. Hence, always make sure to play under this doctrine if you're going to play with tank destroyers. As for building anti-tank units, I only recommend building this unit if you are facing an opponent who is heavily relying on tanks. This is due to the unit being excellent at countering armored threats, especially main battle tanks and armored fighting vehicles, making them a strong defensive choice. However, they have several weaknesses, including their vulnerability to infantry, artillery, and air attacks. Because of this, you shouldn't build anti-tanks unless your enemy is building tanks, as it has no other use other than destroying tanks. If you decide to build anti-tank units, make sure to support them with infantry to protect them from being overrun, as well as supporting them with anti-air units such as mobile anti-air or mobile SAM launchers to prevent them from being destroyed by enemy aircraft. Additionally, they should be positioned strategically in defensive locations where they can ambush enemy tanks, rather than being sent into direct engagements. Additionally, preferably play under the European doctrine if building these units, or tell your teammates playing under the European doctrine to build them to receive the buffs. And again, make sure to use these units in cities and suburbs to maximize their efficiency. Perfect! That wraps up the information on armored units. Now let's dive into building the best stacks with armored units, allowing you to completely obliterate and conquer your enemies with extreme effectiveness. The best armored unit stack you can build with armored units is 1 stack of 1 tank officer with 9 main battle tanks. This stack will be in charge of going through enemy territory and obliterating any defense on its way. Since with the high damage output by the main battle tanks and with the buff of the tank officer, it will be unstoppable. This stack should be at the front line. Then you want to have a second unit stack which will contain 10 multiple rocket launchers. This stack will be in charge of shooting any incoming units from the enemy, such as multiple rocket launchers or anti-tanks which can probe to be a big threat to your tanks. This stack should be placed behind your tank stack. Then you should have a task of mobile SAM launchers and with anti-air railguns if you have them unlocked. This stack will be in charge of shooting any incoming planes or helicopters which can be a big threat to your other units. This stack should be placed behind your tank stack and should be hidden from the enemy so you can bait his helicopters and planes with him thinking that you don't have any air defense. Also make sure that the range of these units' anti-air is covering your other stacks or they won't make any use or protection whatsoever. To add on to that, a very advanced tactic you can use is to bait enemy planes into your silent mobile SAM launcher stack. When you send strike fighters into the sky, the enemy player will instinctively send air superiority fighters to engage them. This is when you move your planes toward your SAM launcher stack. Once the enemy planes enter the SAM launcher's range, they will be completely destroyed, or at the very least heavily damaged. When using this strategy, just make sure not to engage your planes against enemy surface-to-air defenses. If executed properly, this tactic can be extremely effective and costly for your opponents. Finally, you should have some infantry which can be used to conquer territory and to keep pushing into the enemy's territory. With these 3 stacks and tactics combined, you will have an unstoppable force that counters every unit in the game. Nothing will be able to stop this strategy. Using these stacks, you will be able to advance into enemy territory successfully. Additionally, the best way to secure victory is to move these units into the enemy's homeland cities and capital. Once captured, the enemy will be severely weakened and will have very low chance of recovering. From there, use infantry to take the remaining territories and secure the win. That's it. With this strategy, you will dominate the game. Let's now talk about the best tactics you can use with armored units. When it comes to using armored units effectively, understanding the best tactics is crucial. Armored units are powerful on the battlefield, but without the right strategy, they can be easily countered. One key strategy is ensuring that your armored units are always supported by anti-air units. Since armored units are weak against air attacks, pairing them with mobile SAM launchers or anti-air vehicles is essential to prevent them from being destroyed by enemy aircraft. Another important tactic is to use armored units in terrains that benefit them. As I explained earlier in the video, so make sure to use of this tactic because it can make the difference between you winning the battle or losing it. Never underestimate the buffs or nerfs that terrains can give you. Positioning is another crucial factor. Since armored units are strong against infantry and light vehicles, they should be placed at the front lines to absorb damage and deal high output against enemy ground forces. However, they should never be left exposed without support. Instead, use artillery units or your air force to weaken enemy forces before your armored units engage in direct combat. Additionally, always keep in mind that armored units can be countered by specialized units such as anti-tank units, attack helicopters, and heavy bombers. To prevent this, make sure you scout enemy positions before moving in and avoid direct confrontations with units that specifically counter your armored forces. Awesome! Now you know about every armored unit in the game and the best tactics and strategies with it. If this video helped you out, please consider subscribing so I can keep making videos like this. Good luck!